Demetrius, if you were speaking, we can't hear you. Nope,
Yeah,
your microphone's not
We're
working.
good. We're good now?
Yes.
hear you now.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you. All right, we're going to let everyone join in, give everyone a second to join. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our After the Flames Lessons from the Fire Part 2 webinar. If you attended one of the sessions for Part 1, welcome back. And if this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This second installment of the After the Flames webinar series is intended to provide deeper insights into filing insurance claims, understanding coverage, restoration best practices, and a legal Q&A. So first off, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Madison Castillo, and I am the Regional Director for Southern California at HOA Organizers. Netta is here with us tonight. Unfortunately, she has been under the weather for the last several days and lost her voice. So I'll be doing my best to fill her shoes as tonight's moderator. I'm also joined by one of our Vice Presidents, Shauna Gatlin, and Matt Metters, our COO. So they are going to be here as well in the background helping me facilitate tonight's program. So for tonight's program, our panelists are going to present from 5 to 6, and then we'll have a Q&A from 6 to 6:30. You will be able to submit questions throughout the program, so feel free to shoot those off into the question box, and we'll circle back to them during the Q&A at the end. That said, let's go ahead and get right into it with our panelists for this evening. First is Adrian Adams. Adrian is the managing partner of Adams Sterling. That may sound familiar to you as they're the firm that created and updates our industry's go-to website, Davis Sterling. Demetrio Xanthos. Demetrios is the principal of Sachs Insurance Agency. Sachs is licensed to insure in 11 states. Russell Brown, one of the owners of the GB Group. He is our construction expert on the panel tonight as his firm specializes in HOA reconstructions. And we are also to be joined by Oren Asaroff. He's the owner of Home Bio. Oh, right on time. We'll give him a second to connect. Hi, Oren. We were just doing your introduction, so thanks so much for joining us. Oren is the owner of Home Biotesting. They're going to be our expert panelist on all things environmental testing as it relates to wildfire recovery and those efforts this evening. So thank you guys for joining us this evening. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions. So Adrian, from a legal getting some feedback, sorry. Adrian, from a legal perspective, can you highlight some of the key responsibilities for HOA boards when dealing with fire-related damages and recovery, or even air testing, which has been coming up lately, and safety for fire-adjacent properties?
Certainly. First, thank you for having me join the panel. Secondly, we have had some of our associations destroyed in these fires. And so these issues are very timely and very close to home for our clients. Some of the legal issues. Well, the first thing that I guess that comes up is you immediately call insurance and put them on notice, let the carrier know through their broker, because they are going to be the source of the funds for rebuilding. The second thing is you need to talk to legal counsel and look at your CC&Rs to see what your damage and destruction provisions state in the CC&Rs, because they're going to govern what happens next. And it's going to be whether there's enough insurance to cover rebuilding, whether you can rebuild or not rebuild, whether members are going to need to vote on whether to rebuild, whether insurance monies are instead going to be distributed and property sold off. And there are going to be a lot of legal issues intertwined with the insurance issues. And the other potential legal issues will be if there's not enough money to rebuild, and if there's going to be a special assessment to supplement in order to rebuild, you may have some owners that are wanting to sue the association, one for being underinsured. And they will probably argue negligence of some kind, that the association didn't fire harden the buildings, or they'll find some negligence issue that they'll want to sue. So, those are the potential things that they're going to be looking at from a legal perspective at the very front end. And then the second thing is, and maybe this is a Demetrius question, um, they're going to raise questions because it's already been raised with us. Should they get a public adjuster? And Demetrius, you can give us the positive and negative on what a public adjuster would be.
We fielded that question last session, and again, it's kind of there's pros and cons. So obviously, a little feedback. If you hire a third-party adjuster, one of the biggest elements is what are their fees? Okay, so depending on whether you're bringing them on for your home or if the HOA is bringing them on to reconstruct a $200 million condo complex, what is the structure of their fees for recovery? Because if it's a sizable fee, it's going to actually reduce the amount of money you receive to rebuild. Now, the pros are the Department of Insurance and the state is allowing non-California licensed adjusters to come into the state to assist, and they're to be supervised by California licensed adjusters. So this isn't a bad thing. This is the state trying to create capacity so that there's more adjusters because there's more damage. But an adjuster, let's say from Milwaukee, may really not understand the Palisades or Altadena, right? So this is where if the replacement estimates that are coming from this adjuster are just way out of alignment, this is where a third-party adjuster familiar with the area can negotiate on your behalf to recover more monies, right? So those are the two big pros and cons.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that for us. Demetrios, can you talk to us a little bit about how the wildfires have already impacted insurance policies, premiums, and coverage availability thus far, if we're seeing that already for renewals?
As we discussed last time, it's way too early to have any estimates as to how this loss is going to impact the industry. But what we can do is we can look back and for those who weren't on the last episode or installment, we have to remember that the insurance industry is a large ship turned slow. So very quickly, the reason you've seen all of these drastic changes in 2024, and it's a lot of the brand names, the Farmers, the Travelers, the State Farms, the Nationwides, the reason you've seen them trim or change their appetite to get off of a lot of what they would consider unfavorable risk with a higher propensity for claim activity is because the top 25 insurers in the United States collectively in 2022 and 2023 lost $60 billion. So these efforts in 24 to non-renew and trim their underwriting appetite on older, non-sprinklered, high frame density is a reaction to the fact they lost 60 billion. So estimates are that this catastrophic fire is somewhere possibly in the number of 120 billion. Okay, but we don't know how much of that 120 billion is insured, right? And we don't know what carriers had the big piece of the pie. So is State Farm impacted? Is Farmers impacted? Is Travelers impacted? Is Nationwide impacted? Who was sitting on a majority of the losses in the Palisades and Altadena? We don't have that information either. But if what I just shared is any indication, if even half of that 120 billion was insured, that's going to be another devastating blow to an already, very rattled and dysfunctional insurance market.
Absolutely. And similarly, Russell, how have the wildfires on your side of things the wildfires and other recent disasters that we've experienced impacted the availability of construction labor and materials. Have we seen that already?
Yes, you're already seeing the national contractors that kind of follow around natural disasters begin to insert themselves into the markets. There is some concerns about price gouging during devastating times like this, and the governor's trying to put some things in place that help protect that. From a local standpoint, I'm based in San Jose, California. For example, they have 60 counters at the building department that you can do permits at. And I was in there the other day and there were 3 people working, and all of the other assets had been reallocated to LA. So the what we'll see initially is you're going to see a big, robust push to expedite the permit process, which is always a bottleneck. The quickest reference point we have is the Napa fires, and I'll touch on what we saw, how they navigated that, and what's to come. So with the building permit process, Newsom is releasing updates pretty much every 2 weeks with how he's trying to expedite this. The newest one is that he's made a executive order that building permits typically follow through, public works and planning and the building department, and they're being mandated to look at them simultaneously. He's made a mandate that from permit application to permit admission is to be under 30 days, which is all good, but I'd like to see that on it actually come to fruition. We'll wait and see. We're still seeing the public side of the project underway. And what I'm referring to is the water set up for these locations? Have the soils been tested? Has the hazardous debris been removed? Is there electrical power provided? Is there sewage up and running? Are the roads free and clear for safe construction? That is phase 1 of what's happening right now as we speak, is they're trying to get the public works. Think of it as a light switch turned on. What we saw in Napa is we saw them deregulate the building permit process, which was phase 1 of what we've seen with LA. Phase 2, what we'll see is the public works begin getting some leeway to make things happen quickly. We see that happening. Phase 3 is where they will find the line in the road about what levels of regulation will they make old structures go into the new construction code. And there's a tremendous impact on not only construction, but architects, engineers, environmental testing, subcontractors. It goes down the list. What we should expect to see is them continue to deregulate, especially as people become more and more vocal about the permit process. I believe that a good first step was them getting rid of the Cal EPA regulations and the Coastal Commission regulations, which from a permit standpoint bottlenecks projects tremendously. So it was a good effort to start. The 30-day turnaround is a great effort to start. We want to see how this all moves forward, but it would not be unheard of to see lots of national contractors bidding your work given the scarcity of available manpower.
Understood. That makes sense. I think you touched on something, so I'm going to take it a step further on this.
Sure.
Proactive steps HOA boards can take now to streamline the reconstruction process.
Absolutely. I won't speak to the insurance or legal side, but those should definitely come first. Legal, get your claim filed, and then when you're beginning the process, if you're in a full rebuild, you're going to want to get your county assessor, get your property reappraised to get the proper tax appropriated to your building or your property. If the building has been severely impacted or completely demolished, you should pay taxes reflective of that. So that's an easy first step. Once you've filed your claims and you've gone through the legal process, as Adrian was talking about, Step one would be engaging an architect or an engineer once you kind of have the path forward of what you'd like to do. There's going to be different routes and different pros and cons of each. We sat in the webinar last time where some groups talked about not rebuilding. We talked about what is it if I build like for like? And I'll touch on that really quick. Like for like, meaning that you're going to build the same structure. We are seeing more deregulation there where they're trying to expedite that. We do think that they'll make you beef up the earthquake construction codes for that building. We do see them beefing up what they did in Napa with buildings needed to be sprinkled moving forward. We do anticipate them having some tighter energy stuff related to Title 24. But those would be the three big ones that I would see would be forced on like for like, but they are trying to expedite that. Lastly, I mentioned engineers and architects are going to be extremely spread thin, especially in Southern California. If you're having difficulty retaining someone to partner with to rebuild your property, design it, construction management, I would encourage you to look outside of LA. There are many groups in the Bay Area that service all of California, and to just kind of widen your search to help find a appropriate partner for your project.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now, I'm going to move on to Oren. Thank you for joining us, Oren. I think we decided to add a home, like an environmental testing panelist, because that was one of the questions that have been coming up since we've been dealing with the wildfire recovery. So, can you talk to us a little bit about how wildfires impact air quality, and especially inside HOA communities, and what the long-term health concerns for fire impacted and fire adjacent communities is?
Of course, and also thank you for having me here. I noticed from a few of the other panelists, they slowly brushed on my topic, so definitely glad to be here. But to answer your question, think about wildfire and hazards. You're not just burning something that's controlled or what we know. It's not like, hey, I burned paper, here's the byproduct, or I burned petroleum or build tires. It's a wildfire. So when you're dealing with the air quality, you're not just dealing with just ash, char, and just in general sense. It could be char from a vegetation, char from a house. It could be soot coming from certain inorganic materials. So you're dealing with a wide variety of particulates that are coming into the air. Now, what we like to call this is combustible byproducts. These are the byproducts of the combustion reaction. So first thing that we're going to see is in the air quality is an increase in that in the dust. You have to think of wind direction. You have to think about these particulates just spreading out. And this is not something where it's just local to a mile. They can travel for miles. So that's the first incident of concern. Now with particulates, breathing anything foreign into your body is not the best thing ever. And then it's more of a concern for certain parties, such as if you're a smoker, if you're geriatric, a child, it's a little more difficult to respond to those things. Or if you have asthma or COPD. The next thing you have to deal with is the vapor that's released, as well as the VOC. A lot of these things are burning, are releasing gas into the environment. Now, this may not have an effect immediate, but a lot of these char, soot, ash, wildfire debris can have an effect over the next few months. So something that we see as a hazard today, which is more like on the dust, asbestos control, lead dust, later could be more of concern as like a VOC byproduct that's being released. So there is local and then more further out air quality concerns. Now, in terms of what does this mean for the people who've been exposed, it doesn't mean the end of the world. I'm not a medical doctor, so you still go get your checkup, talk to your pulmonologist. But generally, it just depends on who you are, how you are as a smoker, going to get fresh air, letting your body's natural defense expel the particulates, things such as that. Now, one thing I would touch up on, just because I saw Demetrius talk about it and Russell talk about it, Demetrius' side was talking about how out-of-state adjusters are coming in. One thing that there has to be a play in that is that a lot of the out-of-state adjusters may not know the local area in terms of regulations and what we care about here in California and in Los Angeles, such as, for example, asbestos. California has a strong asbestos concern. So I know one of the things I'm being called for air quality is, hey, do I have asbestos now, dust all over my home, or lead dust? What we're actually finding with most of our testing there is actually we're finding a lot of lead containing material and lead dust in neighboring neighborhoods, such as in Altadena, Pasadena, or even Santa Monica. Surprisingly, more so than asbestos. But that's something that's stronger on the local market than it is in other parts of the country. So something that we've seen some adjusters who come here not aware that California has more strict requirements around those topics. And then what Russell was talking about with the permit, how they're trying to expedite it by controlling some of the regulations, he's correct there as well. For example, Cal Recycle was trying to push a requirement of soil contamination. They want it tested, and if it's elevated for either heavy metal or ash soot to remove 3 to 6 inches, they decided this is going to take too long, just remove everyone 3 to 6 inches in the areas in the fire. So they are doing efforts to try to speed up the process, but ultimately it is still to control the health concerns.
Madison, I have a question, a follow-up for Demetrius on this. If there are associations that are adjacent to the fires, so they did not burn, they just are adjacent, but they're overwhelmed with smoke and the soot, and it infiltrated the buildings. Is that something that they can contact insurance to clean the buildings, to clear all that out?
Adrian, exactly. We've got some new and some visitors from tonight. We covered that, but the answer is yes. If you have smoke damage or soot damage, again, you want to take the steps we discussed in session 1, which is file a claim with your primary carrier. And remember, we've got 2 tracks now. You're either a homeowner or possibly you're on this call and you're a board member and you're overseeing the interests of the common area and or the common area and the structures. So you want to file a claim with the primary carrier as well as you want to file with FEMA. We haven't covered that tonight, but we want to remember that even if you have an existing insurance policy, you still want to file a claim with FEMA because the goal there will be that any shortcomings or gaps in coverage, you may be able to get covered through FEMA. So smoke damage, soot damage, that is all something. Now, again, I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know the policy language and the carriers that everyone on this call have. But I can say with certainty that if they had a standard admitted carrier, there's a very high likelihood that what you discussed is covered. Even if you have a non-admitted carrier, it's highly likely that it would be covered because it would need to have been disclosed to you when you accepted the quote that you were accepting a quote that had these specific exclusions, removing coverage for these damages or perils, right? So again, I am conscious of the fact that it's been tough sledding for the past 4 years, and we may have some participants on the call who have been dropped by a admitted carrier, and maybe they're with excess and surplus, or they may even be layered where they may have 5 or 6 carriers, each having different layers of millions of dollars to collectively add up to their 60 or $70 million community. And it's incumbent on the agent that they have, as well as, understanding what did they accept and what were the limitations or exclusions to this policy. But we are continuing to stress, file with your primary carrier and file with FEMA.
Thank you, Demetrios. Yeah, you touched on FEMA, so I'd like to open it up to the entire panel. And in addition to filing with FEMA, are there any new regulations, funding programs, or government resources available for impacted HOA communities that we should be aware of? And that can be for anyone.
One of the things that I noticed and I want to share, and this is a little bit, insurance-y, but I think it's important. So one of the biggest issues that we have right now is just economics 101, supply and demand. So the demand for all of our buildings to be insured are still there. But as I discussed in the previous segment, you have carriers changing their underwriting appetite, if you will, dumping a ton of supply into the marketplace, right? And so there isn't a carrier or carriers sitting there waiting to take all of that. Oh, we want that 30-year-old non-sprinklered frame. We can't wait to write it, right? So what I've noticed is, and I need to look to my notes, there are 4 risk modeling companies: CoreLogic, KCC, Verisk, and Moody's, who asked the state to accept them in their what they call their PRID, which is the pre-application required information documentation. This is when the Department of Insurance is reviewing if they'll give a carrier either access to the market or price changes to the market. Now, why is this so significant? I think the carriers are driving this because the state, and this is what we should be proud of our state tries to protect our consumers. And they do that through limiting or putting, guardrails on how much of an increase an insurance carrier can pass along in an annual period, okay? By these risk analysis people getting involved in the submission process of carriers requesting more rate, it is to justify the fact that these carriers are asking for more rate than the current guardrails or protections would promote or provide, right? And so we've got a big game of chicken right now, and I won't mention any names, but you've got one carrier saying, I need at least a 22% rate increase to stay in the state, or we're leaving. The Department of Insurance is saying, hey, we can't afford to lose more supply, right? And so I think that they're acquiescing to allowing these risk meters to come into their predetermination of price requests so they can justify, yes, this area is truly high brush, higher propensity for burn, that we need to be able to remove the guardrail so that we can get a carrier to continue to write in these areas. And so that's one of the latest things I've seen develop in the past 30 days.
And to add to that, historically, FEMA has not made money available to homeowner associations. They'll make it available to individuals, but not to associations. Now, with these fires and the new administration in Washington, maybe that will change. I don't know, Demetrius, do you know anything? Have you heard anything about that?
Based on what I saw and the submission process, that they were accepting any and all applications, both personal and business. And we're encouraging everyone to file that claim. And the other thing we discussed about in the last session is, and this was a notice by FEMA, do not be discouraged if you receive a declination, because a lot of this is very systemic right now. A lot of these submissions are coming through their web portal, and there are a myriad of different things that could just kick it into a denial status, which like, let's say eyeballs never even got to it. So they're highly encouraging you, even if you receive a declination, to reopen the claim, ascertain the reason for the declination, and it could be simply a misspelling or an improper address. And but in terms of your question, right now I'm understanding they're taking all, both residential and commercial submission requests, and obviously we would fall under commercial.
Yeah, and I would encourage all boards of directors to file claims.
Absolutely. So considering all of that, Adrian, assuming we'll continue to see major increases in construction costs, insurance premiums, et cetera, how should boards and community managers start to prepare for these increased costs?
Well, they just have to communicate with their members and be prepared that they may need to do some special assessments. and emergency special assessments, because the premiums are going to go up. In fact, one of the things that on the legislative side is that looking at the politics of the thing, Democrats want to increase regulation of insurance companies, and Republicans want to reduce regulation and open it up for more competition. And then in one of the articles I read, the state, because I had spoken a couple of years ago with the insurance commissioner at a regional event, and they were looking at protecting consumers, as Demetrius was saying, and they were doing that by either denying insurance rate increases or slow walking them, which, according to the article, caused insurance carriers to start dropping people and pulling out of the state. In fact, a number of policies were dropped just months before the Palisades fire. And so this increased regulation doesn't seem to be the solution here. What they need to do is to allow the rate increases so that insurance is available. The downside is it's going to cost a lot more. And this is where associations, boards may need to impose emergency special assessments in order to pay for the rate increases, and then look at budgeting for the next year, where they may need to increase the assessments in order to cover the premiums moving forward, because I don't think they're going to go down anytime soon. So we're going to see, as Demetrius was saying, they've got to absorb all of these heavy losses. And so that's going to be through rate increases.
The one thing I wanted to, oh, I'm sorry. One thing I just wanted to briefly add on what Adrian was talking about, and we covered this in the first segment, right? I'm very fortunate to operate in the Western U.S. And I have a purview of the Idaho market and the New Mexico market and the Colorado market and the Missouri market. And one of the things that I brought up, and I'm going to truncate this, is that California has actually been spoiled for decades with incredible insurance premium rates. And I know that might sound ridiculous, but really, for the majority of my career, the state has been priced as a two-peril state, fire and water, right? We don't have a lot of hail. We don't have a lot of convective storms. So whereas in these other states, these are real sizable claim activities. You know, one of my largest claims is a $15 million hail claim in New Mexico, where a large condo complex was just like meteoroids, destroyed the roofs. So what's happening now is because insurance is much more, anything that happens from coast to coast can impact reinsurers and then drive the entire country one way or another. We're actually seeing California's rates now start to actually tip towards what other states have been paying for decades. And they're looking beyond the fact that we're traditionally a two-peril state and beginning to price us like many other states in the Western U.S., which have traditionally been 3 to 4 times more expensive because of what I've just explained. So I guess it's how we look at it. And if we can just be thankful for the period we had, but this is the period we're entering.
Yeah, and just to add on, when on the regular updates, the members are, if they're having to rebuild, they're going to be very anxious and wanting regular updates as to how long is this going to take? What are you doing now? Where do we stand? And they'll be asking a lot of questions about, can we, because we have to move, will the association's insurance cover our relocation costs and living expenses? So they're going to need to put together meetings with the members, and it'll be Zoom meetings, in order to answer questions like that, and bringing in somebody like Demetrius, bringing in somebody to cover maybe the air quality issues, and the rebuilding process and how long it's going to take. And judging from the Woolsey fire, where we had clients with buildings destroyed, it takes a lot longer than what they want and what they think it's going to take. It'll take 4 or 5 years in order to go through the rebuilding process. And so they're going to need to basically alert members right up front, and maybe have somebody like Russell in on the call who can talk about that and what's going to be involved. and then meeting the new fire codes, the fire codes that went into effect January 1, 2023, requiring a fire hardening of buildings. And so they're going to have to meet those new codes. And, and the cost it's going to drive all the costs up. But at the end of the day, they're going to have a stronger building that can withstand fires in the future.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. You touched on a few points that I wanted to highlight as well during our program, but I'll pass it over to you, Russell. We've touched on potential earthquake and energy requirements. Adrian touched on fire code requirements. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Have there been any, other innovations in reconstruction methods or materials that can make buildings more fire resistant or better suited? What do you anticipate that we're going to see, or what do we know for sure we're going to see?
Yeah, what Adrian was talking about is with the fire codes being beefed up, if you will, you'll look at how they're mitigating fires through the materials, through fire systems like sprinklers and things like that. One of the ones that I talked about that you'll see, and you should get familiar with this term, is called intumescent paint. And what it is it's basically a fire rated paint that applies just no different than what you would imagine paint is applied as. And what it does is it creates a slower burn rate. It can be written off as a 2-hour assembly in some cases. So we're seeing more and more of insurance carriers mandating that we beef up the fire side of things with these buildings. When you're building from scratch, it's a lot easier to implement the systems. If you're tying into an existing system, it can be costly. But the advantage of that, as Adrian inferred, it's short-term pain for long-term gain. It is an initial cost, but there are some price breaks that you get down the road. It has less maintenance. It has a longer useful life, things of that nature. So intumescent paint is one. You may see that there will be a mandate for some sort of fire sprinkling for the buildings. And then regarding energy, there's a saying in the construction world that they don't waste opportunities like this. They don't waste funerals. They try to push change hard during these times. And so you may feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. They're going to deregulate, but then they're going to, mandate some other things. And the answer is yes to both. It's just the nature of how these things go. From a rebuilding standpoint, Adrian is also right. They are always a little bit short-sighted with what actually needs to take place. There could be months and months more of pre-construction, just getting the public works up and running, the roads cleared, getting the soils tested, as Oren was touching on. There is a huge demand right now for environmental contractors that are capable of gathering these hazardous materials, compiling them in the regulated manner, disposing of them in the regulated manner. But it could be quite some time before even the first groups begin breaking ground. So I just want to be the bearer of bad news, but also set realistic expectations that a single family home, if you had the permits, the specifications of all the materials, and it's a 3,000 square foot house, it should take about a year to rebuild. If it was a association, you can just compile that as you grow in size. There's really no magic wand of what this is what I have, how long should it take? There's so many variables to it. It's just too early right now. But the unfortunate part is I was very involved in the Napa North County side of things with the fires, and they are in year 5 of the rebuild, and there's still a huge portion that are still to come.
Right. And getting an architect to draw plans that you can submit to the building department, and there's going to be a run on architects, which means that associations need to jump on this very quickly and lining up people that they need to get this through and start the rebuilding process.
Yes, start now. Just like Adrian and Demetrius were saying with the claims, start building your team now. Start interviewing, start understanding, who's a good fit for what you're trying to do. And there's no harm in getting this thing going. The faster that you can be proactive with sourcing your team, if you will, from legal to insurance to architects, engineers, contractors, etc., the faster this goes. So the more proactive you can be, the better. You can start today.
Thank you. Along those same lines, I think communication is a key point here that we've all touched on at some point. So I want to open it up to the entire panel and talk about how HOAs can effectively communicate with the homeowners about the realities of this being, a long drawn out process, unfortunately. Um, as it relates to the insurance changes, the reconstruction delays, air quality concerns, how should we be best communicating with the homeowners and board members?
I'll say a
I
town
wanted to
hall
ask,
meeting.
oops, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say a town hall meeting with experts like Russell and Oren and Demetrius, because the board's going to want to hear from experts, not from their own board members. They're going to want to, and they're going to appreciate that the board moved quickly to put together the team that Russell was talking about. And you get those on a town hall meeting with the members, it'll help calm them and reassure them that things are moving in the right direction. Demetrius, I'm
You know
sorry.
what? No, no. What I wanted to say is I wanted to point towards Oren on this, right? In that people can physically see the damage, the burnt structures, but people can't physically see what's in the air. And we've been receiving a lot of communications, both from the first and since then, about should we power wash our house? Should we get an air quality test? And how should that be communicated to the community? So, Oren, I wanted to swing to you a little bit about that invisible nature, and what are you suggesting? Even if you were in the general vicinity, what should you do to communicate about testing air quality? What happens if you were in the path, washing your home, testing your home, testing the drapes of your home? What are your thoughts around that?
Of course. And just to circle back real quick on Adrian's comments, I do agree with that on having a panel of experts when addressing the tenants, mostly because there's a lot of times where people have creative questions, but not be typical. I actually had one last week where I did a speak, and someone literally brought up a picture and said, "What is this chemical? Is this dangerous?" And it was one of the flame retardant that was used in the control the fire. And when you see a blue liquid, the first your thought is like, "What is this? This seems something scary." Where in reality, it's like, okay, this just has a special cleaning requirement. Kind of hard to communicate that without having an expert there. But to dive in with what you're saying, Demetrius, is yes. A lot of times it's like the first concern is what can I see? And then the even worse concern is what you don't know. And that's what I'm combating with a lot is the unknown, the uncertainty, especially when it comes to tenant communication on what to do and what it applies. And the hard part is there's no one shoe fits all scenario because where were you to the wildfire? Where is the property in the vicinity to, the Eden fire, the Palisades fire, or any of the fires that occurred in the area? Because you're going to have different concerns, whether it's, hey, we test and there's an elevated tar and ash, or I'm seeing a lot more lead dust, or the whole structure was burned down, and now we have to deal with this whole thing of asbestos and lead contamination. So what ends up happening is people are looking through Instagram, looking through all these things. It's just communicating like, hey, your property, we did testing. This is what we're seeing as the concern. This is the scope of work so we can get it done. This is the steps that are going to be involved. So it's not, hey, here is problem number one that you could see unknown in the air. Here's problem number two, because that ends up scaring tenants because the risk and concerns that we could see in the air right now is hundreds between different types of ash, char, VOC, debris, list of hazards, PCB, and so on. So I'm finding it's better to just let's see specifically what you have on your property in your area and then we can address it from there, if that answers that.
That was great because that's been a big question about what we can't see.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. We've been getting that as well. So thank you, Demetrios.
And then one thing I will throw out there, so we do have our own lab. I've actually been doing a lot of analysis myself. From testing in Santa Monica and the Palisades, including Altadena and Pasadena, throughout parts of LA, what I am finding a lot in my analysis right now, I'm not finding a lot of asbestos. I'm finding 40% of the properties are having a lot of lead dust. I'm seeing a lot of vegetation level of char, soot, and ash. Um, but that's where we're seeing a lot of the spikes just from my current data.
Thank you. Okay, we do have some really good Q&A questions submitted, but before we go ahead and move to that segment, I wanted to roundtable one last question for the panel, and we'll go one by one. If you had one piece of advice for HOA board members managing a disaster like this, what would it be? One takeaway. We could start with Adrian.
Okay. Well, for those who have not been in the fires, for associations that are in high risk areas but have not been burned, uh, they need to immediately fire harden their associations. And if that means doing a special assessment to raise monies in order to repaint the buildings with what Russell was talking about, fire resistant paint, removing trees, putting in fireproof roofing, limbing up trees and removing shrubbery. I've been doing that with my own house in the mountains. I've removed all the pine trees. I put in metal roofing. I put in fireproof siding because I don't want to lose it, lose the house. And the boards need to be thinking about what can we do in order to prevent the loss of the buildings. Having the association burned to the ground is the worst case scenario. So what can they do now to avoid that? I would encourage boards to seriously start moving in that direction now.
Thank you. Demetrios, your piece of advice?
Keeping with Adrian's theme, I would say if you haven't been impacted yet, this is a really good time to invite your insurance professional in to truly understand the coverages you have for the association, and then strongly recommend that the insurance professional assist you based on the association's insurance, what they should be informing unit owners or homeowners, what they should be insured for. And the one thing that we're really finding out is loss of use. Monies to go live somewhere else. Do you know that the average amount of coverage that people have is 4 months? That's going to be severely inadequate in this catastrophic event. And so understanding they can get coverage for loss of use, they can get coverage for loss assessment. There's these buckets of coverage that for really not much more money can get hundreds of thousands of dollars of more coverage. So I think it's an opportunity, again, sticking in line with, is to reassess what you have and re-educate your community on what they can do to be prepared from an insurance perspective.
Thank you. Oren, shooting it over to you.
I want to piggyback a little bit on what Russell mentioned earlier about getting the team along. There are specific construction requirements, especially on hazardous material removal and hazardous control, that are very limited. There's not that many out there, and there's going to be a few bottlenecks on the process of getting the whole home reconstructed. Get the team early, figure out who you're going to work with, just because there are bottleneck professions that's going to slow down the whole process, and you don't want to fall behind on that. And then I know it's one, but I'm going to throw another one in. Fight the unknown. When it comes to air quality, environmental concerns, news coming up, especially as hazards are addressed differently, it's best to fight the unknown with the tenants. The more people are left to wonder, the more things can kind of go a little off the rails. So just over communicating, being on top of that, especially with the environmental concern, could definitely manage. A lot of times, even if something is fine, or even if you're not sure what's going on, letting them know that you're dealing with it as an HOA or as a property, let's kind of fights that unknown conversation.
Thank you. Russell?
If I had to give any advice, I would suggest if you have made the commitment to rebuild, from a contractor's point of view, begin the process now. Why? Because there is going to be a big focal point on LA and how they're processing this right out of the gate. They tend to be a lot more lenient in the beginning. So you can capture the relaxed approach to getting these permits. So I would say if you have made the commitment that you're gonna rebuild, I would engage your team immediately and get that going. There's also a couple loose items that I wanted to tie up. Where you can get your existing building plan set is you should be able to look this up online. You can expedite your rebuild by giving this to an architect and say, I want to build it just like this and XYZ. And they should be able to expedite that pretty quickly if you can get the original plans. They're allowing you to build like in kind up into 110% of the square footage that you originally had. So if you were gonna expand, they're giving a little bit of leniency there of 10%. They're not mandating all the electrical upgrades. So if you had gas fire pits and gas appliances, you can be grandfathered in to still have those. But I that would be my short advice, would just be start the process now. It's typically more lenient in the beginning, and you can capture some benefits by being quick.
Perfect. Thank you all so much. So like I said, we did get some pretty good Q&A or questions through the Q&A feature. So I wanted to move into that if we could. The first one being for Adrian. Is there a potential we will see a class action lawsuit on the insurance industry for those that have lost their home or not, if they have a mortgage but can't afford the continued rise in home and fire insurance costs?
Well, there certainly will be class action lawsuits against against Edison, the utility company. As against the insurance, who knows? There may be those filed just in the hopes of getting some kind of settlements out of them, out of the insurance industry, but I don't know that there would be a solid basis for doing that.
Did anyone else want to touch on that?
We only have one attorney. I'm going to leave it to Adrian.
Perfect. All right, this one's for Demetrios and Adrian. So from a homeowner's perspective, not a board member, how do I evaluate the adequacy of the certificate of liability insurance provided by my HOA? I want to ensure that the HOA is buying appropriate types of amounts of insurance and that I am buying appropriate types and amounts of complementary insurance.
Okay, I can answer that. Talk to Demetrius.
Very funny. You know, so the legal answer is that question is either posed to us by someone that lives in a single family community where the HOA owns in common the common area elements, the amenities, but the structures are with the homeowner, or it's been asked by someone who lives in a condo setting, mid-rise, mixed use, high-rise type setting. So, and both have different but similar answers. So both of them should have a set of governing documents, and both of them should have an insurance section. And in that insurance section, it should detail what the HOA's responsibility is for their primary insurance. And then there should be a section defining what the unit owner's responsibility is to insure. Now, in that first setting, that single family home setting, it's very customary that the HOA is responsible for everything owned in common in the common area, right? So pools, clubhouses, entry gates,
Right.
mailboxes, monuments, but the homeowner is solely going to insure their home and their contents. In the condo setting, it's really going to go down one of three roads. Either it's going to be bare walls, where the HOA insures everything up to unfinished drywall and electrical plumbing stum out, and the unit owner picks up everything inside the unit, flooring, appliances, cabinetry. Could be a combination of as initially installed by the declarant. So there could be a scenario where the HOA not only insures the building, but ensures a level of standard interior, standard fixtures, standard cabinetry, standard flooring, or in some very odd cases, which they're out there, the HOA not only ensures the structure, but ensures the units and improvements made to the unit, right? So
Right.
the shortest answer is understand your governing documents, and then with the insurance professional you're working with, ask them to read your governing documents and to line up what you're responsible to insure and what you believe the HOA is responsible to insure. That's the best way to approach that.
Yeah, and one of the problems that we've been running into with governing documents, the insurance provisions, is that so many of them say 100% insurance coverage, and boards haven't been able to get it.
Right.
It's just not been available to them. And so they've been under-insuring because that's all they can get, which I suspect may lead to some lawsuits against boards for not insuring 100% when they really couldn't. It just wasn't available. So we've been amending and restating documents to give more flexibility in the insurance side, and that's something boards may want to consider.
Thank you. Okay, the next one I have is for Russell and Oren. So water concerns on contamination. We have a lake in our HOA. The airborne debris will come down on the lake, debris contaminants may be washed down into the lake. What should HOAs do about aquatic life in the lakes?
So there's a few variables off the bat, which is how big of a body of water we're dealing with, and then proximity to the actual fire. Because, for example, if lake is directly downhill of the fire, then I'd be concerned about like heavy metal contamination and getting that purified. If it's more, we're dealing with a few hops away, or if it's a few miles away and it's more on debris falling in, yes, that can cause some effects, especially things such as soot can have acidic residue. But then it's just a question of how big is the body of water, because you may have a volume that's big enough where the smoke may not affect it enough to start eradicating the wildlife, or you're close enough for the body of water small enough, or just the sheer metal and the sheer byproduct coming in makes it a little more livable. So it just depends on one, proximity, two, what is the volume? What are we dealing with in terms of aquatic? Are we worried about the vegetation? Are we worried about the fish, koi, whatever kind of water it is? And then from there, it's just creating a plan, whether it's just setting up a filtration. If we're talking about a full lake, maybe the large body is enough and you don't have to do anything. A simple water test could show us that the concentration is high enough to be of concern. And then third, what is the water natural filtration? Is there a fountain? Is there a river? Is there something introducing more fresh water into it, like rain coming down that you can expect in April? So it's just what is the proximity, what is the body of water, and then just assessing from there. So
To
it
add,
could be, sorry, go on.
I was going to add to what you're saying. One of the things I would be concerned about is if the association stocks the lake, we represent a lot of lake associations, and they allow the members to fish the lake. Can be concerned about heavy metal contamination of the fish and would want them tested. And it may be that we would do a moratorium on fishing in the lake for a while.
Exactly, because I know one of the cases we've had in the past is there was a large construction like in Palos Verdes, and then they had the mudslide. So we had to do a lot of ocean water testing. And on certain times, swimming wasn't allowed, or even in certain areas, fishing wouldn't be allowed because now you have a risk where you may eat something that's contaminated. Oh, there's some mercury exposure because of the runoff coming from the landslides or whatnot. So a simple water test, or even just collecting from the fish, but usually in our case, we'll just like for the water, we could see what the exposure is in that area.
Thank you. All right. For Demetrios, can you please explain benefits of California approved insurance companies versus non-California approved insurance companies?
Admitted versus non-admitted. So the basically we have a fund, and if you're an admitted carrier, you pay into that fund, as well as by paying into that fund, you get the benefit slash protection that should that insurer fail, the state's going to step in and honor the policy, right? So that's one of the primary perks, as well as they are much more financially regulated. They're providing much more financial data to the state on their performance, their viability, if you will. If you're a non-admitted carrier, the primary deterrent is that they do not pay into this fund. So if they were to go insolvent, the state in no way has any responsibility to honor that policy. Now, I will tell you, a majority of the new business that my agency wrote in 2024 was predominantly placed with non-admitted carriers. The reason I want to stress that is I go back to the earlier point that supply of the admitted markets is dwindling. And it's not dwindling because these brand names are leaving the state. It's dwindling because they're changing their underwriting appetite. And their appetite is like turning into the center of a bullseye of a dartboard. You got to be built less than 25 years. You got to be fully sprinklered. You got to be claims free. Not a lot of clients look like that. So I want you to be comfortable with non-admitted markets. And what we need to focus on when we're offering non-admitted markets is their financial strength. What is their financial strength? Because a majority, again, of what we wrote in 2024 was almost 3-to-1 placed with excess and surplus versus admitted lines. So those are the two pros and cons. Top line pros and cons.
And I would agree. A lot of our associations that we represent had no choice but to go to non-admitted. They just couldn't get insurance in an admitted carrier.
And what you'll find is, and it's part of what we do quite a bit, because back to an earlier conversation about did the board do their diligence, et cetera, you know, we, along with many other insurance professionals, we're providing a marketing list, and we're showing the 12 to 15 admitted markets that declined to quote, so that the board can say, we did try. Here's a list of all of the carriers that declined to quote, and the only offer we had was E&S. Now, the other thing, since I have your attention on this, it's going to become more and more prevalent, especially if you reside in a community that has a value north of 50 million. You're going to also start to see much more layered offerings. Right. Okay. What I mean is, no carrier wants to sit on $70 million of frame non-sprinklered build in 65. They'll sit on 10 million of it, but they're not going to sit on 70 million of it. So a lot of what we're building now, and this was prevalent with catastrophic, but now it's prevalent with fire, is you're going to have one carrier take position A on the first 5 million. You're going to have carrier B take position on the next 10 million. You're going to have carrier C take 10 million, excess of the first 15. And then when you get to layer 4 or 5, you may have a carrier step up since they're position 4 or 5 and take the remaining 20 or 30 million. But that is also going to be a prevalent push, which is layered multi-carrier options and higher deductibles on the peril of fire.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next. Can you talk to us a little bit about the components of a well-written claim versus a poor one?
You know, let me make this as simple as possible. And I've sat in on these classes. These adjusters are instructed, their primary edict is to find coverage. Okay. So it's very straightforward. What they do is they submit the claim, they make sure that the address and the name is equal to who is presenting the claim. Is that the name of our insured? And is that the address we said we would cover? After that, it's very straightforward. Was one of the perils of coverage, fire, wind, hail, certain acts of sudden and accidental water loss, vandalism, collapse, was that the cause of loss to trigger coverage? Okay. So if I were someone submitting a claim, I would be very clear and have an understanding of what it is that I believe caused the loss. I would identify that, and I may ask my agent, he or she, can you tell me before we submit this claim, is this a covered peril? Will this trigger coverage, right? And again, backup sewer and drain. There's a myriad of things that can trigger coverage, but ultimately, I don't think there's anything like a poorly submitted claim or a great claim. You have to submit a claim providing when it happened and what you believe is the cause of loss. And you should probably know what your covered cause of losses are to trigger your insurance to come into play.
And just to jump on that, something that we get called a lot actually with public adjusters is exactly that. Just because we know something is sewage doesn't mean the insurance is going to assume the same thing. So sometimes they may need a test to prove that is in fact sewage water, or such an agency like, oh, we follow IRCRC. How can you prove it's a Cat 3 loss? Which would trigger a whole different claim. So a lot of times it's not only identifying what it is that they're looking for, but it's also proving it.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Okay. Adrian, this one's likely for you. It's similar to one from earlier, but it's posed a little bit differently. So I'll go ahead and ask it. Is there a likelihood of a class action suit against the city, county, or state related to any alleged failures to respond adequately to the fires?
I'd say absolutely yes.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? I saw some head nods.
And I'll also say that we don't do class action suits.
Okay.
There are law firms out there that specialize in that. And I have no doubt, because there was no water in the fire hydrants, there was missteps all along the way. There's going to be problems. The city's going to have defending, and the county will be involved. You're going to see anybody and everybody that they can think of is going to get sued.
Okay. Another question that we have, do any of you have how-to documents that you can share with us that HOA boards can do proactively to help homeowners prepare their properties before the disaster?
Russell, do you?
Yeah, is that
Yeah.
referencing like a roadmap of a maintenance schedule or something along those lines? Yes, we do typically have something along those lines. I don't know if it's like formulated as that style of print material, but
Sure.
yeah, we could probably build a roadmap of how to best practices, if you will.
That would be great. Thank you.
So one of the things that came up, and it really, there's two sides to it. There's the HOA side and there's the homeowner side about cataloging what I
Yes.
have and what should be insured. And because in the event of a complete devastation, if you've lost everything, you've lost your PC, you've lost your family photographs, you've lost, hopefully you have things in the cloud. So a couple things. In terms of if you're a homeowner and you've experienced loss and you don't have access to things, what we're strongly recommending is hopefully a lot of your photographs were digital, and hopefully a lot of your photographs are in your cloud, whatever your respective cloud is, iCloud, Mac Cloud, whatever. And you can understand that bringing down those family photos of your holidays, and in that shot beyond your loved ones is your television, is your couch, is your fixtures you had in your kitchen, etc. I would start amassing that. The other digital footprint is your credit card. If you have recently remodeled a kitchen or a bathroom in the past few years, go dig out those receipts on what you spent at the Marble Place and what you spent at the Cabinetry Place. Those are those things. Additionally, don't forget on the HOA side, you have something called a reserve study. And in that reserve study is a components page. And that components page, if done well, should list all of the amenities that's owned in common that you're reserving for to replace and repair. So that's another good starting point. But above the and beyond that, in our last call, Russell mentioned there's companies that will come out almost like as an attorney on retainer and do an assessment. How many buildings, how many units, what are your material types, and possibly some recommendations and to be storm prepared. And that's another recommendation. And that was you, Russell, right? We talked about that.
Yeah, a little bit. And I talked about just on a quick touch, if you are returning to a building that was not demolished and you have concerns about the habitability of it, I would recommend partnering with an environmental contractor and a general contractor. Look in all the areas, test everything. There are some there. Demetrius, you touched on this last time that you can go back and reopen a claim. That if you find something new, but you just want to be as proactive as possible. Go make sure there weren't any brownouts in the electrical outlets. Test the water, do an air clearance test. Just test everything and have a professional set of eyes on it, just to give you that peace of mind that you're not leaving any stones unturned.
Another thing too, there's going to be a lot of contracts they're going to be entering into, and they need to be reviewed. There needs to be a legal
Absolutely.
review of the contracts, because I just reviewed one this morning where the person, the company, wanted the association to assume all of the liability, regardless of anything that that contractor might do or not do, including gross negligence and intentional misconduct. And you don't want the association taking on that liability. That needs to be on the contractor doing the work. Now, can they be absolved of simple negligence? Sure. But if it's going to be gross negligence, intentional misconduct, they get into a fight with a homeowner, punch out a homeowner, and that homeowner ends up in a hospital. You don't want to be on the hook indemnifying the contractor for that. So there needs to be a review of contracts before they get signed.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All great pieces of information. Another question that we have from the Q&A. We just completed a multi-million-dollar siding and trim rehab. Is Hardy board fire resistant? And is it enough to save us from needing to repaint with fire hardening? Is our insurance broker a good resource for determining that? If not, who? Someone like Oren or Russell?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that's fireproof. There's fire resistant. Hardy is fiber resistant or fire resistant. It's made of it's a fibrous product that is resistant to flame. So you would be able to get around the intumescent paint side of things. It's a great resource. I think it's like a 25-year warranty on it. I would definitely look into what your recourse is for anything related to this from an insurance standpoint. Yeah, Hardy's a great product. We install a lot of it.
Russell, they're going to be painting once they install it, right?
Yeah.
And how much is it, the increase in cost in using the fire resistant paint?
It's about well, I mean, there's a million variables, but just a simple wave of the wand price that everyone wants to hold me to here. So thank you for that, Adrian. No, I'm just kidding. But um, I would assume that standard paint versus intumescent paint would be like $3 a square foot more. So marginal compared to what you get out of it.
So belt and suspenders, they should do both.
That's right.
Thank you. All right, the next question. If an HOA is located a few miles from the fire perimeter, is that close enough to warrant air and soil testing? How does the HOA determine whether it needs to test?
So kind of circling around the same topic of whether it's to prove to the insurance, whether it's to have somebody communicate to the tenants, or just general requirement from the city or state. There is always going to be a reason. It just where you are just has a different reason. One reason could be such as, okay, you may have, and I'm not going to touch on the lawsuit, I'm going to let the lawyer talk about that part. But if someone was to question that their area was contaminated without having a test, you wouldn't have a way to disprove that. So even someone who may be far away could have an argument for that on the testing side. Now, another angle could be the water habitat, or you know that you have a concern, the insurance knows you have a concern, they took care of it. How do you know that it was actually cleared? So you may require some area clearance testing. Another one could be with the soil. What if there's a playground right there and you want to make sure that the kids can play in that area? So it's not so much of a question of how far do I have to be before I need to consider testing. There's a wide variety of reasons of testing. It just depends on what is the concern you're confronted with. What are you dealing with? Because being closer may have one set of concern, where a different area may have a whole different set of concern. It's kind of the same thing where I was saying earlier, where it's like not one size, like one shoe fits all sizes. I'm saying that you feel that's saying correctly. But that's there's not really like a distance. It's just more of like, what are you dealing with?
And I would agree with Oren on that. If anybody raises concerns about it, if homeowners are concerned, the board's concerned, just do the testing.
Yeah.
It's not that much, and it'll give assurance to people, either that there's nothing to be worried about, or yes, there is something we need to do, and let's get it done. Um, and we do that with mold issues. When a homeowner is raising mold issues in their unit, tell the association, go test it. Because I want to be able to show, no, there's nothing, no mold there, so that, to discourage a lawsuit or to defend against it. And if you don't, you have a homeowner that may just be crazy about that kind of stuff, as we did have with one. She took a sledgehammer and destroyed all of her walls looking for the mold, and then sued the association. So,
I might have been on that one with you. I
Yeah.
think I was involved in that. I have a very similar story.
Yes, and so the testing does not cost very much, and it's worth doing.
Adrian, what I was
Absolutely.
going to ask you isn't peace of mind valid reason enough?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's actually something I will consult a lot of. Is I always tell a homeowner, tenant, whatever it is as like the topic of assurance. Would you be able to sleep at night 6 months from now? And would you have in the back of your mind, like, I don't know if my air quality is well.
Should have tested.
We had abatement done. Did they do a good job? Is my house not contained with asbestos? Is there mold job done correctly? And you'd be surprised how much the testing cost. So exactly what everyone's saying, just weird to promote it myself. But yes, I'm always going to encourage the testing.
Thank you. All right, we have one more question from the Q&A, and then I have some that were submitted through social media. So that should take us through 6:30. The last one submitted through the Q&A is the problem with insurance is that when you do file a claim, you are penalized by a mark on your record, and selling the home has the mark and may prohibit a new owner from obtaining insurance. Is this a valid statement?
Well, the insurance claim is going to follow the homeowner. The insurance claim is not going to follow the house. Now, obviously, there'll be record of a claim, and back to what I was talking about maybe a half an hour ago about these companies that insurance companies pay to get immediate information, and that information consists of permits pulled, fire scores. They care about, is your building in a high crime area? All of these things. And so in terms of the question, it will follow the homeowner, but the house itself shouldn't have an impact on the resale of the home, especially if it was addressed and rebuilt correctly, and or the part that was damaged was rebuilt correctly. In terms of, and it's a simple rule, filing a claim, your deductible versus your loss. Okay. If you've got a $2,500 deductible, and in order to address your damage, it's a $4,000 claim. Well, are you really going to file a claim and create that activity to recoup $1,500? My advice would be not to in this marketplace. But if you've experienced a catastrophic loss and your deductible is $2,500 and your losses are $47,000, I would file the claim. That's what it's there for.
Thank you. Okay, moving into questions submitted through our social media platforms. If my HOA is burned to the ground and or there are a few amenities that were spared, my understanding is you still have to pay your HOA fees. Now, can I sell my burnt lot and can I write off the difference in land value prior to the fire?
Write off on taxes or writing?
The question was posed as write off the difference in land value prior to the fire.
Okay, I'm not sure what they're asking. But as far as the paying of assessments, yes, the association still has bills to pay, and so if owners aren't paying their assessments, they can't pay the bills. And that might be continuing with insurance, although there's going to be a reduction in a lot of costs, and they can reduce the assessments, reduce the budget, but owners are still going to need to pay so the association can function.
Thank you. Can the budget be reduced temporarily, or once that's
Yes.
done, it's just
Right.
temporarily in the
Right. Because
event?
once they get rebuilt, then you're going to have full, services back in play.
Correct. Okay, thank you for clarifying. Another question submitted, if I choose not to pay, as it could be months or years to rebuild, what impact will that have on my credit score, which I worked hard to build up?
If they choose not to pay their assessments to the association,
Correct.
association may be forced to go into collection mode and foreclose on the either non-judicial or judicially on the unbuilt space, and which creates its own set of issues for the association. They now own a lot that's got nothing on it. But it's even worse with condominiums, because the condominium continues to exist up in air. It's just airspace. And if you've got a third floor condominium with no structure around it, condominium is still there. And the owners are already asking, because we're looking at that now, do I have to pay assessments on something where I can't live and I can't access? The answer is yes.
Thank you. Well, that covers all of the questions that I saw, both from the Q&A and the through our social media platforms. So thank you all so much for your time this evening. I hope everyone got as much out of this as I did. So thank you all for your wealth of knowledge and sharing your time with us. If anyone has questions for us, you can email them to dearnetta@hoaorganizers.com. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat, and I will give each of our panelists a moment to say some closing words as well.
Well, I want to thank you, Madison. You did a great job running the show here for us and
Thank
keeping it
you.
moving. And I really appreciate the panelists. I've not worked with any of them except Demetrius before. And I find that Russell and Oren, you guys are really good at what you do. So thank you for being on the panel.
Yeah, I have similar sentiments. Great job, Madison. Thanks for mediating that, and to the panelists, great job. And I just want to extend my availability for further speaking engagements with any of you. If you would like some assistance, you can always get my contact information. And even if I'm not the right person, I can hopefully point you in the right direction. So thanks for making the time to hear our panel speak. So thanks.
Thank you.
I'll echo those sentiments. Thank you, Madison. Excellent job. Thanks again to HO organizers to put this on and to keep this prevalent for their membership and their clients. And I've always enjoyed speaking with Adrian and quickly enjoyed speaking with Russell and Oren. And again, what I want to reiterate is do not hesitate to file. File a claim with your carrier, file a claim with FEMA. And again, like I said, even if you receive a declination, go back and reopen it and find out why you were declined. It could be nothing more than just a system glitch. All right. Because they're processing a lot of claims.
And like everyone else said, thank you for having us here. It was an honor. Thank you for moderating, Madison, and also the kind words from everyone. But yeah, ultimately, all the attendees hopefully walk away learning a little bit more of how to deal with all the uncertainty and the changes going on, and making sure we just have a little more knowledge today.
Thank you. Well, thank you again for your time tonight. Stay safe, everyone, and we will be in touch. You can reach out to us again on the email I put in the chat or connect with us on social media. So, like I said, stay safe and have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye.